How are you guys doing today?
Good.
Good, good.
Hey, the sinks and stuff's back on this side. Okay.
God, awesome.
The rest of the fixtures were working. We just shut the sinks off. It's a drain causing the problems. Just let me know about it.
I'm glad that we got them back. Thank
The
you.
world.
Yeah, it does. All right, everybody, we'll go ahead and get started. So let's just really quickly do a recap of the Plato class. Just a 5-minute sort of reminder or recollection as far as what Plato's philosophy was all about. I still have one more part left to finish, and then we will talk about Aristotle. So remember, Plato was one of the first, really the first philosopher in the West to come up with an explanation about everything. Right? He had a whole systematic theory that extended all throughout philosophy. His philosophy started with the idea called the theory of the forms. So remember the allegory of the cave. Right? Like somebody has been in a cave their entire life. They're kind of chained to the couch, so to speak. The only light they see in the cave is on the wall. It comes from shadows that comes from the fire behind them. Like people will go like make like little sock puppets or something. So that's really the only thing that you see that people in the cave see. And one day he's free and unshackled from from sort of being chained there. He goes outside and sees the light of the sun for the first time. The light of the sun is so blinding that it takes his senses, his eyes, a long time to adjust. But once they adjust, he adjusts and he sees the world in a whole different way. You go back inside and tell the other people in the cave, hey, there's a whole world outside beyond this cave. And the others in the cave will be like, nah, man, that's okay. You know, I'm content here. I'm content in this is what I know. Don't test me any further. Just leave me alone. This is the allegory of the cave. What's it mean? Plato said that he has an idea called the theory of the forms. Right? Somewhere in maybe a different reality, that there is a form, a perfect idea that is out there. And here on Earth, here in this world, we're just sort of imperfect reflections of imperfect imitations, I should say, of those perfect forms. So, like think about like a great chair, right? In the alternative universe, there's a perfect idea of chair, and certainly this cheap thing I'm sitting in the office here is an imperfect imitation of that. The idea being here that there's an objective truth somewhere out there. There's an objective idea of goodness. Um, there's an objective idea of truth. We might not fully reach it here on Earth, but we are constantly kind of striving towards it. So remember, we talked about some other dimensions of this. Um, he talks about knowledge. Knowledge comes from your soul, whenever your body dies, your soul is removed from your body, but then your soul learns all the truth about the forms since it's no longer tied to your body. And of course, the Greeks believed in reincarnation. So, whenever you're born into a new body, your soul kind of forgets what it learned. And they say Plato kind of came up with this idea that whenever you learn something, it's it's your soul recollecting what it once knew in a past life, or maybe what it once knew when it beheld the forms. And we also, this is where we were kind of ending on. This is definitely the Spark Notes version of last class. Okay, we were ending on the body and mind duality. Plato really distrusted the body. Like he actually called the body the prison house of the soul. Like the body is what inhibits the soul from truly understanding the forms. And whenever we extend this into ethics, the practice of the good life, he especially distrusted, um, especially animalistic tendencies. Remember, so both Plato and Aristotle, who we're going to start today, talk about the three parts of the soul: the vegetative, which is what keeps sort of our organs, our heart functioning, our brain functioning. The animalistic part of the soul. So this is what's responsible for things like eating, food, drink, sex, basic survival. And then there's the intellectual part of our soul. This is a part that is unique to human beings. And Plato kind of built his ethics around the idea that you should be distrustful of pleasures of the flesh, and while we might not withdraw from them completely, we need to be wary of them. So think about something like gluttony. Glut- Gluttony is overdoing it with eating. Maybe intemperance would be getting too drunk on margaritas when you go to the Mexican restaurant. Um, like whenever you think about something like sex, right? Somebody who's an addict to that. Plato kind of built his whole system of the good life around this notion. Like if you are too embroiled in animalistic impulses, then you will not live a happy life, because the happy life is centered in the intellect. The Remember that Plato wrote all the stuff about Socrates. So Socrates' apology, where he talks about the unexamined life is not worth living, that's Socrates' words, but it comes from Plato. So everything you learned about Socrates really is framed through Plato and this whole philosophy that I've outlined. So this is Plato is, they say that all of Western philosophy, all of Western thought owes a debt to Plato. And they're really not wrong. As I told you guys last time, even like in the Bible, St. Paul, when he wrote the epistles, St. Paul was definitely very much influenced by Plato. Yeah, his work, we're still talking about it today for many reasons. So that's a quick recap. Now I want to just kind of extend it really quick into talking about his ideas about political philosophy. Because part of the good life, and we're going to talk a lot about government in Nicomachean ethics, but part of living a good life is having a government that's going to look out for your best interests. And based on what happened to Socrates, Socrates was pretty much killed or ordered to be killed by a lynch mob, right? That's really what happened to Socrates. Poor guy was just annoying, right? He asked too many questions. Um, he questioned authority one too many times. So the people in charge, you can kind of see some parallels to stuff that's happening even today. Right? He questioned stuff one too many times. People in charge didn't like it, so they ordered him to kill himself. Right? That's the poor, sad story about Socrates. Plato saw that, and he was very distrustful of democracy. Like whenever you talk about democracy in ancient Greek, in ancient Athens, it was pure democracy. Right? Unlike today, where America is a republic, and the ancient Athens was a pure democracy. So Plato kind of thought that if you put government in the hands of the masses, well, if the masses are truly not in touch with the forms, then that is a bad problem. Most people in the masses are in touch with what's good for me, what's good for my bodily pleasures, or what's good for my pocketbook, or whatever. That's what most people in the masses are all about. So Plato kind of really distrusted mass populations in order to make these decisions. You can kind of see why he would come to that conclusion. Um, like, does the opinion of the majority, is that always the best opinion? Arguably not. So what he came up with as a solution, and I want to see what you guys think about this idea. He came up with, Plato actually wanted an authoritarian style government. Okay? And the authoritarian style government would be led by this figure called the Philosopher King. I typed it in the chat for you, Philosopher King. So the Philosopher King, let me see. I don't think I have my book with me. No. The Philosopher King figure, the idea of this kind of person, you want somebody leading your government who's competent. You don't want some imbecile running your government who's unqualified to do it. So what Plato suggested was you put government in the hands of a philosopher. So what's that mean? Well, throughout different parts of their life, people spend the first 50 years or so of their life doing nothing but study. So in the early years of your life, you would practice things like math. Like you would get really good at math and logic and sound reasoning. In the middle parts of your life, You would learn about stuff like um, politics, ethics, um, and maybe some of the harder disciplines like metaphysics, physics. You would learn all about that stuff. And by the time you get to about age 50, you were sort of, wow, here on Earth, we can't truly know the forms. If you spend 50 years of your life doing nothing but studying, you're probably closer to understanding the forms than what the average Joe is. So Plato kind of thought that like the smartest and brightest of the philosophers should kind of take over as a philosopher king and rule over the rest of the people. His argument here, um, for one, the philosopher king will know the common good of everybody. The philosopher knows what the common good is by his understanding of the forms. Um, this raises some questions, though. Like, whenever you think about leaders, like who's in charge, who do you want to be in charge? Do you always kind of want like the academic person to make these decisions? Can we possibly even kind of see where this would lead downhill? There have been a couple of cases in history where we have had a person who is like a philosopher king. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius was a philosopher, and during his rule of Rome, he was one of the greatest of the Roman emperors. He helped expand Rome into like Germany and all this stuff. And in American history, you guys might know of the President Woodrow Wilson. Right? Woodrow Wilson was the president during World War One. He was the only president in our history who had a PhD. He was a history professor. Um, but Woodrow Wilson's presidency is an interesting one. He tried to form the League of Nations, the United Nations, before the United Nations became a thing. Um, he was a little too early on that. He led the country through World War One, but he also kind of helped lead some progressive reforms. But his presidency is marred by the fact that he was pretty racist. That's one thing that sort of marred his presidency, as well as the fact that he didn't even finish his presidency because he sort of had a stroke, and during the last year of his presidency, his wife was the president. He was still the president, but his wife was making all the decisions. So his legacy is kind of tarnished by several things, including that. But he's probably the closest that America, at least, has gotten to a philosopher king. Thomas Jefferson was probably the second closest thing, but Thomas Jefferson distrusted big government. So it's kind of hard to put him in that. But where can this go wrong? I don't know. I kind of wanted to turn the floor over to some of you guys now. Whenever you think of a good government, do you want somebody like that? Would you want somebody like that who's spent their whole life doing nothing but study and things like that, or would you rather have somebody with different qualities?
I think it depends. Some people who are highly educated lack common sense. So it depends. Are they book smart and people smart? Do they have common sense to lead? or is it just simply something that they've read out of a book with no life experience?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Mandy. The common sense thing. Um, I'm certainly one of those people who lacks common sense. Um, but Plato's answer to that was that's why you would wait till somebody's like 50 or so, because by that point you will have mastered not only the intellectual aspect of that, but also just the common sense living part of it. So the fact that you would wait till somebody's slightly older, um, in their 50s or so, they've lived life long enough to have that experience to fall back on. So I'm glad you said that, Manny, because you helped me qualify that. Um, with that qualification, especially now, what do you guys think? Was that somebody who you would want leading you, or would maybe another quality? Some of y'all think, don't make me call on you. Don't make me be Socrates.
From my experience, from like, I know it's different, but like bosses, they're supposed to be leaders. I had one really bad boss this past time. She lacked compassion. So I think compassion's because we're all going to make mistakes, but it's how you treat somebody when they do make a mistake. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So, could you are you kind of suggesting then that if somebody's like too intellectual, they might lose like the empathy part of it?
Yes.
That, yeah, maybe you would start seeing somebody like a math equation or something, right? Instead of seeing them like a human being. That's a good point. How about some of the rest of y'all? What do you think, Jordan?
Uh, I don't know. I'm kind of uncomfortable with like. I mean, how do I put this? I feel like if all you do is study and like that's like where like your entire understanding of humanity comes from, it could be easy to reduce people to like ideas and lose like a grounded perspective of the people around you. And so I'm kind of skeptical of the idea of the philosopher king.
Yeah, it sounds like your reasoning is pretty similar to Autumn's, right? Like you can kind of see how that would become a big issue if you would look at people abstractly like that. Emily, you always have good stuff to say. What do you think of the philosopher king?
I kind of agree with Mandy on this one. It can either be a good thing or it can be a bad thing, but you never know until it happens. And then I also agree with Autumn too. So, because like you got to treat people like human beings, you can't just look at them like test subjects or whatever and be like, okay, this is what they're doing, this is what they're learning, or things of that nature. So it depends on the situation. Like, yeah, so
Yeah, you can. I guess you're kind of suggesting you can kind of see branching paths, right? You can see where this would go right. You can see where this would go wrong. You know, there's a great 18th century novel called Gulliver's Travels. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it. Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. It's a satirical book, but Gulliver's Travels plays on this idea. There's this guy, there's a traveler, of course, named Gulliver. He gets on ships and he gets shipwrecked on this island. And when he gets to this island, he discovers that horses are running the island. Like on this island, horses have intellectual thought. And human beings on the island are like savages and brutes. He calls them yahoos. That's what the word Yahoo comes from that book. But throughout in the book, the horses the horses justify things like slavery, enslaving the yahoos through intellectual reasoning. Like they rationalize things like slavery through intellectual discourse. So kind of like what Jordan and Autumn were saying a few moments ago, where this could maybe go wrong. Jonathan Swift, I think, captured that really interestingly in Gulliver's Travels. If you're curious, even like there's like a little, even if you don't want to read the book, there's like a little movie. I think Ted Danson played Gulliver. It's really cheesy, but it's Swift played with that idea in a fictional form in that book. All I know is I look around in different places of government today, and it makes me wish that we had some more intellectual people in government at all levels, the state level, the federal level, and the local level. Maybe more people like that in government, but maybe not authoritarian rule. Right? Like I think that would be a great thing. The early 1900s in America, during the progressive movement, they shared that idea. Like you would only see people getting elected to Congress who had strong education and backgrounds and stuff like that. You don't really see that anymore. So, yeah. And the last thing that I want to mention about Plato before we transition to Aristotle is Plato also distrusted art. He thought that art, music, all of these different things would not lead you to a good life. Why? Because art, literature, music, all these things are imperfect representations of the forms. Like, so they will only lead you astray more than they will help you. So Plato would not like my primary field, which is literature. Right? Plato would be very distrustful of that. If you think about his arguments, though, in that respect, you can kind of see where he's going with it. Think about how like different things today can kind of distort you from reality. Like we'll use pornography as an example, right? Like that type of thing. Like that can kind of lead to sort of distorted views on healthy sexuality and things like that. So you can kind of see where he was going with that. Yeah, art can be something transformative and wonderful, but Plato did not see it as such. So, as I told you guys last time, Plato points in that picture, in that Michelangelo picture, right? Plato's pointing up, Aristotle's pointing down. So this is Aristotle is kind of more of the grounded philosopher in that sort of picture. And we owe many of our knowledge fields today to Aristotle. Aristotle wrote the original book on ethics. He wrote a lot of other books too. He wrote Nature. He wrote a book called Physics, Poetics. Like whenever we talked about, some of you took me for lit. Whenever we talked about stuff like tragedy, can you have a tragedy about a bad person? That comes from his book Poetics. His book Rhetoric, that's where he came up with stuff like logos, ethos, and pathos. He wrote a book called De Anima, on the Soul. Like the guy wrote about everything. That's kind of where I'm going with this. He wrote about everything, and we owe a lot of our knowledge today to him. I don't know if you guys have ever thought about it, but think about it. Like, how does a book like Nicomachean Ethics? How has this book survived over 2,500 years, really, to get to us today, with the way that we have it today? How did it even survive the course of history? Well, especially in the Middle Ages, like you had the Catholic Church helped preserve a lot of this stuff that we're reading, Plato and Aristotle, but also the Islamic philosophers. Islam borrowed a lot from thinkers like Aristotle, so they would translate his books over into Arabic, and that's another reason why we still have a lot of these writings. Whenever you think of that question, though, you have to think to yourself, how much do we have now? How much of what we have now is actually Aristotle's complete thought? Maybe some of the stuff did not come down to us over the course of time because people in power didn't want them to get to us. That's kind of a conspiracy theory. In just as a aside, his book, The Poetics, he talks about tragedy and things like that. But he later in the book, he makes mention of talking about comedies. But today we no longer have that portion of that chapter where he talks about comedy. Well, if you think about something like comedy, like we just talked about with Plato, how much should we distrust art? Can art lead us to bad places? Well, if you think about it, in the Middle Ages, with the Catholic Church or even the Islamic caliphates, maybe they would probably have a high extreme distrust of comedy. So perhaps we no longer have that book because people in power didn't want them to get to us today. There's a big conspiracy theory that underneath the Vatican, in Vatican City, there's a giant archive that goes for miles underground in Vatican City. And there's a big conspiracy theory that a lot of lost works in history are archived there. And unless you're like a cardinal or something, you can't get down there to look at the stuff. So, fun fact. I don't know if you guys knew that there's a giant archive underneath Vatican City, but it's the truth. It goes for miles underground. And the Catholic Church has been around for 2 millenniums. So they probably have a lot of stuff under there that we don't know about. But Aristotle's ethics is something that they did want us to know about, and even when you think about things like morality, we talked about the difference between morality and ethics, but even like a lot of like what we think about in terms of morality comes from this book. So as you guys could probably tell just from looking at the first sections for the day, it's a pretty dense read. You have to be patient with it as you go, but it is a very rewarding read as you work your way through it. So let's, if you guys have your books, let's just look at some passages, and we'll talk about some certain passages here. The first book of Nicomachean Ethics kind of sets the groundwork for the larger project that he is doing. Okay, and if you look at the very first few lines of Nicomachean Ethics in Book 1 on page 1, okay, he says, every art and every inquiry, and likewise every action and choice, seems to aim at some good, and hence it has been beautifully said that the good is that at which all things aim. But a certain difference is apparent among ends, since some are ways of being at work, while others are certain kinds of works produced over and above the being at work. So I'll stop there. But every action, art, and every inquiry seems to aim at some good. So he's kind of suggesting here that as human beings, we want to aim at the good. We want to aim at the ideal. Do we always get there? No. But it's nonetheless something that we strive and aim to do. He says on page 2, if you look at the way that it's numbered, you see like little numbers on the side, 1094B. You look at the pretty close to the end of that paragraph right before it says chapter 3. He says, for even if the good is the same for one person and for a city, that of a city appears to be greater at least, and more complete both to achieve and to preserve. Or even if it is achieved for only one person, then that is something to be satisfied with. But for a people or for cities, it is something more beautiful and more divine. So our pursuit aims at this and is in a certain way political. So it raises the question, like, whose happiness should we prioritize? Should we prioritize the happiness of many, or should we prioritize the happiness of one? Aristotle's kind of suggesting here we should kind of focus on the happiness of many. Ethics, he says in this first section of this, ethics is a science. It is a science aimed at trying to reach this idea of the good, to try to aim for that ideal. It's a practical science. This is practical knowledge, he says. This isn't knowledge that we're just learning just for the sake of learning it. It's something that we can kind of put to use in our everyday life and in our everyday practice. I'm going to jump to book 2 real quick. I'll kind of swing back around to book 1. This is let me log into our Moodle page real quick. I have a handout on there I was going to show you. I'm going to play you guys this video from real quick. I think the video will explain it. We'll kind of lay this foundation, and then we can kind of dig it deeper from there. So I'm going to show you this video. You guys should be able to hear it when I play it in a second. If you don't, somebody speak up and tell me. Okay, I think it'll work.
Imagine a person who always knows what to say, who can diffuse a tense situation, deliver tough news gracefully, is confident without being arrogant, brave but not reckless, generous but never extravagant. This is the type of person that everybody wants to be around and to be like. Someone who seems to have mastered the art of being a person. This may sound like an impossible feat, but Aristotle believed that while rare, these people do exist, and they are what we should all aspire to be. Virtuous. And there's a whole moral theory based on this idea of virtue. But unlike most of the moral theories we've discussed, virtue theory doesn't spend a lot of time telling you what to do. There's no categorical imperative or principle of utility. Instead, virtue theory is all about character. Rather than saying, follow these rules so that you can be a good person, Aristotle and other virtue theorists reasoned that if we can just focus on being good people, the right actions will follow effortlessly. Become a good person, and you will do good things. No rule book needed. So why should you become a virtuous person? Because eudaimonia. Virtue theory reflects the ancient assumption that humans have a fixed nature, an essence, and that the way we flourish is by adhering to that nature. Aristotle described this in terms of what he called proper functioning. Everything has a function, and a thing is good to the extent that it fulfills its function and bad to the extent that it doesn't. This is easy to see in objects created by humans. A function of a knife is to cut, so a dull knife is a bad knife. And a function of a flower is to grow and reproduce, so a flower that doesn't grow is just bad at being a flower. And the same goes for humans. We're animals, so all the stuff that would indicate proper functioning for an animal holds true for us as well. We need to grow and be healthy and fertile. But we're also the rational animal and a social animal, so our function also involves using reason and getting along with our pack. Now you might notice that some of this sounds a lot like parts of natural law theory, Aquinas' theory that God made us with the tools we need to know what's good. Well, Aristotle had a strong influence on Thomas Aquinas, so part of Aristotle's thoughts on virtue theory ended up in natural law theory. But for Aristotle, this isn't about God's plan, it's just about nature. Aristotle argued that nature has built into us the desire to be virtuous, in the same way that acorns are built with the drive to become oak trees. But what exactly does it mean to be virtuous? Aristotle said that having virtue just means doing the right thing at the right time, in the right way, in the right amount toward the right people. Which sort of sounds like Aristotle saying exactly nothing. I mean, how vague can you be? But according to Aristotle, there's no need to be specific, because if you're virtuous, you know what to do all the time. You know how to handle yourself and how to get along with others. You have good judgment. You can read a room and you know what's right and when. Aristotle understood virtue as a set of robust character traits that, once developed, will lead to predictably good behavior. You can think of virtue as the midpoint between two extremes, which Aristotle called vices. Virtue is just the right amount, the sweet spot between the extreme of excess and the extreme of deficiency. And this sweet spot is known as the golden mean. So let's take a look at some particular virtues, starting with courage. What is courage? To take a closer look at this, let's head to the thought bubble for some flash philosophy. Walking home from a movie, you see a person being mugged. What is the courageous action for you to take? Your impulse might be to say that a courageous person would run over there and stop the mugging, because courage means putting yourself in harm's way for a good cause, right? Well, no. A virtuous person, in the Aristotelian sense, would first take stock of the situation. If you size up the mugger and have a good reason to believe that you could safely intervene, then that's probably the courageous choice. But if you assess the situation and recognize that intervention is likely to mean that both you and the victim will be in danger, the courageous choice is not to intervene, but to call for help instead. According to Aristotle, courage is the midpoint between the extremes of cowardice and recklessness. Cowardice is a deficiency of courage, while recklessness is an excess of courage, and both are bad. Aristotle said that you definitely can have too much of a good thing. So being courageous doesn't mean rushing headlong into danger. A courageous person will assess the situation, they'll know their own abilities, and they'll take action that is right in the particular situation. Part of having courage, he argued, is being able to recognize when, rather than stepping in, you need to find an authority who can handle a situation that's too big for you to tackle alone. Basically, courage is finding the right way to act, and a lot of the time, but not all of the time, that means doing a thing that you know you're capable of, even if doing it scares the pants off of you. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Aristotle thought all virtue works like this. The right action is always a midpoint between extremes. So there is no all or nothing in this theory, even honesty. In this view, honesty is the perfect midpoint between brutal honesty and failing to say things that need to be said. Like, no one needs to be told that they have a big zit on their face. They already know. The virtue of honesty means knowing what needs to be put out there and what you should keep quiet about. And it also means knowing how to deliver hard truths gracefully, how to break bad news gently, or to offer criticism in a way that's constructive rather than soul-crushing. The virtue of generosity works the same way. It avoids the obvious vice of stinginess, but also doesn't give too much. It's not generous to give drugs to an addict, or to buy a round of drinks for everyone in the bar when you need that money for rent. The right amount of generosity means giving when you have it to those who need it. It can mean having the disposition to give just for the heck of it, but it also means realizing when you can't or shouldn't give. So now you can see why Aristotle's definition of virtue was totally vague. Where that golden mean is depends on the situation. But if you have to figure out what virtue is in every situation, how could you possibly ever learn to be virtuous? Aristotle thought there was a lot that you could learn from books, but how to be a good person was not one of them. He said that virtue is a skill, a way of living, and that's something that can only really be learned through experience. Virtue is a kind of knowledge that he called practical wisdom. You might think of it as kind of like street smarts. And the thing about street smarts is that you gotta learn them on the street. But the good news is, you don't have to do it alone. Aristotle said your character is developed through habituation. If you do a virtuous thing over and over again, eventually it will become part of your character. But the way you know what the right thing to do is in the first place is by finding someone who already knows and emulating them. These people who already possess virtue are moral exemplars. And according to this theory, we are built with the ability to recognize them and the desire to emulate them. So you learn virtue by watching it and then doing it. In the beginning, it'll be hard and maybe it'll feel fake because you're just copying someone who's better than you at being a good person. But over time, these actions will become an ingrained part of your character. And eventually, it becomes that robust trait that Aristotle was talking about. It'll just manifest every time you need it. That's when you know you have virtue, fully realized. It becomes effortless. Okay, but why? What's your motivation? What if you have no desire to be the guy who always says the right thing or the lady who always finds the courage when it's needed? Virtue theory says that you should become virtuous because if you are, then you can attain the pinnacle of humanity. It allows you to achieve what's known as eudaimonia. This is a cool Greek word that doesn't have a simple English translation. You might say it means a life well lived. It's sometimes translated as human flourishing. And a life of eudaimonia is a life of striving. It's a life of pushing yourself to your limits and finding success. A eudaimonistic life will be full of the happiness that comes from achieving something really difficult rather than just having it handed to you. But choosing to live a eudaimonistic life means that you're never done improving. You're never to a point where you can just coast. You're constantly setting new goals and working to develop new muscles. Choosing to live life in this way also means you'll face disappointments and failures. Eudaimonia doesn't mean a life of cupcakes and rainbows. It means the sweet pleasure of sinking into bed at the end of an absolutely exhausting day. It's the satisfaction of knowing you've accomplished a lot and that you've pushed yourself to be the very best person you could be. This is morality for Aristotle. It's being the best person you can be, honing your strengths while working on your weaknesses. And for Aristotle, the kind of person who lives like this is the kind of person who will do good things. Today we learned about virtue theory.
Okay, so he does a good job setting this this groundwork for us as far as what Aristotle's project is. As he said, the idea of the book is how to live a good life is something that we can do. We can do it. It's within our capacity as human beings to do this. How do we do it though? We do it by doing it. We have to develop habits, good habits, good dispositions. If we do not develop these good habits, it can lead to vice and things like that. Later, especially whenever we start talking about Christianity later, especially when Christian theologians started talking about things like sins, a lot of the stuff that they got came from Nicomachean ethics. The big difference between them is Aristotle's project kind of argues that we can sort of transform ourselves. We can do this ourselves through our own strength of character. If you look at it from more of a religious perspective, the only way you can become truly better and transformative is through the saving power of grace. So that's really the main difference. A lot of these ideas kind of intersect between them, but the question is, can you do it yourself, or do you need God's help to do it? Aristotle thought you could do it yourself. So let me pull this chart up that I have for you. We'll see what you guys think about some of these. Let's see. Here we go. So, as he said in his video, part of Aristotle's kind of like central thesis through the whole book is that we can, whenever we think of good things, of virtues, we think of those in terms of a median, of the mean. Think about it. You can kind of quantify. His argument is this isn't something subjective. This is something that you can kind of quantify mathematically almost, how these virtues work. He argues that most of the time a virtue is the middle point between two extremes. One extreme is a deficiency, so you show a complete absence of that virtue. And the other extreme is excess. Maybe you display that virtue to a fault. And the true kind of virtuous state is somewhere right in the middle. And that's kind of the whole throughout the whole book. He's going to spend different chapters talking about different virtues. And he talks about courage in the first couple of books. Courage, he says, is the middle point in between being a coward on one end, and on the other end being rash. So the video used that example. Imagine you see somebody getting mugged on the street. Do you intervene to try to help that person? Well, if you do, what would go through your mind? Like, let's say the person was like 7 foot tall and 300 pounds and looked like they could totally whip you, right? Would you automatically intervene in that case? Arguably not, right? I saw Emily saying no, right? You wouldn't try to beat up the 300-pound, 7 foot tall guy, Emily?
Nope, I would probably call the police because that's something I could not. No. Mm-mm.
You want none of that, right? However, let's say that let's say you run into a situation where it looks like somebody who you could physically take, but you choose not to. You choose to look the other way, turn the other way. That would be being a coward, right? Because you could have done something, You chose not to. You can kind of twist this thought experiment in several different ways. Imagine if the injustice you see happening, the person has a gun, right? Like, would you try to intervene in that situation when the person who is hurting somebody else has a gun? Arguably not, right? Like, you would, at our heart, we have self-preservation first. But true courage is that middle point. So how you would display that courage depends on the situation. So maybe it would be going to call somebody for help. Today, you see stuff like that happening. You guys tell me, whenever you see stuff, these injustices and stuff happening today, instead of helping, what do people do? You tell me. You're seeing it right now in the news and stuff. When things happen to people, instead of helping them, what do people do these days? I'm being cynical here.
I think that a lot of times people just look at needs of people and they claim that they're not going to get in their business. That's the reason why I can't help or get engaged, because I don't want to get in their business. I, however, am not that way. I'm really good at getting in people's business. Just saying.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, man. Where I was going, people break their phone out, get their camera out, and record it. Right. So instead of intervening, somebody today would probably just whip their phone out and try to record the thing going down instead of doing something about it. That's an awful habit that has come up in the age of social media. People want to break it. Maybe that's a good thing because you're getting documenting it and proof and things like that. But lots of times you could probably do something better to help the person instead of just recording it. I've noticed that happening a lot in the past couple of weeks. I'll see videos of something going on. The people will just sit there and record it. Lots of other ones we can just kind of preview here. Temperance. That temperance is like the virtue of, whenever we're thinking about things like eating and drinking and sex and stuff like that, like we were talking about with Plato. Being temperate is the virtue in between being self-indulgent and then being insensible. So what's that mean? So like, think about it like if you go out to the Mexican restaurant, right, and you want to have some alcohol. Maybe just having that one margarita, right, and calling it a day after that, maybe you get your little buzz from it, right? But having that one margarita, that's not a bad thing. That's being temperate. But if you get 3 to 4 margaritas and you leave there and you go blackout and you forget what you did the next day, well, that's probably a self-indulgent person. The deficiency is if you're a prude who wouldn't drink alcohol at all, right? Because you think that it leads to awful bad behavior or whatever, right? Aristotle would see that as a deficiency. Like, you can do something like drink alcohol and be in the middle with that if you do it in moderation. We can kind of put that up. We'll talk more about these in the next couple of days. But you can put that idea to the test. Like, can you tell an alcoholic to drink in moderation? Right? No. this is kind of where Aristotle starts going into talking about things like addiction and things like that. Like I know Jordan is minoring in addiction studies, so keep an eye out for this, Jordan. Aristotle's gonna be talking about all this. Generosity, thinking about like giving, being generous is the middle point between giving too much versus being stingy. So, you never give anything away to anybody ever, versus maybe you give too much. Maybe you're trying to show off to somebody. The middle point would be being generous. Magnificence, he talks about later. That's people who have the means to be very generous. So you see, I'm not going to go over all this list, but you can kind of see what he's doing in his project and looking at these middle points between two extremes. He qualifies this in these early chapters. Let's see. There are some things, if you look at page 30, there's some things that you cannot have a middle way on, he says. Let's see. If you look at the top of page 30, a couple of lines down, he says, there is then never any possibility of getting anything right about them, but one always goes astray. Nor is there any doing well or not well about such things by committing adultery with the right woman, and when and the way one ought. But simply doing any of these things is to go wrong. It would be like believing that there was also a mean condition and an excess and deficiency concerned with being unjust or a coward or dissipated. For at that rate, there would be a mean condition in excess and in deficiency, an excess and a deficiency and deficiency. Just as there is no excess or deficiency of temperance or courage, because the mean is in a certain way an extreme, so there is no mean condition or excess and deficiency of those other things. And however one does them is in the wrong. In general, there is no mean and excess and in deficiency, nor any excess or deficiency of the mean condition. So in other words, something that's sort of morally reprehensible, right? You can't be an adulterer. You can't be an adult. There's no middle way in being an adulterer, right? Like maybe somebody who would cheat or something would be like, I only did it this one time, or it wasn't anything physical. It was just talking to the other person, right? The excuses people use. Aristotle's point here, there is no middle way whenever it comes to something that is naturally a vice. You can't quantify something like cheating, for instance, because it's always wrong. There's no middle ground. I only did it once, or it was only a one-time thing, or it was only talking and nothing physical. There is no middle ground there. It's always wrong. So he puts these guardrails out to kind of qualify this, that there are some actions that are always wrong because they're always on one extreme. You can't have a middle ground. That's an extreme. So it's important to kind of note that qualification to all this. You guys agree with that? You think he's right? Do you think people sometimes try to do that? Try to sort of quantify something like cheating, right? Like, oh, I only did it once, or it wasn't physical. You think people do that often? I see you nodding, Autumn. You want to comment on that?
I don't know if I should really get into that.
You don't have to use it. You don't have to use concrete examples or anything.
But yes, I agree.
Yeah, people who are deficient in character will do such things, and they will try, not just cheating, there's other things. People will do lying, right? Stealing. You can't steal moderately. I only stole an apple at the grocery store. It's not like I stole an iPad, right? Stealing is something naturally bad. You can't murder somebody is a middle way. Murder is something that's always wrong. Think about stuff like 10 Commandments, right? There's some things that are just naturally against our human inclinations. You can't do those in a middle ground way. Yeah, so that is an important qualification he makes. Let's see. I think if there's anything else I wanted to mention. And again, just one last point, just to reinforce what the video said. His idea here is this isn't something you're born with. It's not something that comes easy to us. Sort of getting the frame of mind to do these virtues in the middle way. It takes work, it takes practice, but it's something that we can all do if we put our minds to it, he argues. So as we kind of go through the next few classes, I want you to kind of think about this question I'm posing. Is this something we can do ourselves, or do we need maybe divine help to do it? I think that's an interesting question to ponder. Aristotle's got all the ideas, all the secrets. How do you live a virtuous, happy life? We'll see in the next couple of weeks what you think about his findings. So we're going to be looking at 2 sections a day the next 2 weeks. And I'm going to circle back around to talking about book 1 a little bit Wednesday, because there's one concept I didn't have time to cover. But book 3 is about, let's see. Yeah, I forget what the exact subject of book 3 is. Book 4, though, is about generosity. I think book 3 is about, let's see, I need to review my notes. Oh yeah, book 3 is about how responsible are you for certain actions. Like maybe if you do something under coercion, is that something that you should be held responsible for? That's kind of like what he goes into with book 3. So we're going to be looking at a couple of different books every day up to the next week and a half. The only exception to that is next Monday, a week from now, instead of looking at book 5 and 6, we're going to skip 6 and go straight to 7, because 6 is kind of an aside. it's always kind of difficult to teach it. So we're going to read 9 of the 10 chapters in Nicomachean Ethics over the next couple of weeks. Wednesday, all of next week, and then the Monday after that, we'll finish it. Okay, so give yourself plenty of time to read. Maybe read a little bit here and there. Don't try to binge it all at once. That's probably the best advice for reading this. Sometimes if you do binge it all at once, go back a day or two later and read it again. That'll help you comprehend and remember it, because it's not an easy book. It's not an easy book to read, but it's a rewarding one. I think most of the time. This is my 3rd time teaching this class now. Usually at the beginning, people are groaning, yawning. Oh God, this book. Usually by the time we get to the end though, you start to see the value of it. So be patient with it. Keep an open mind with it. Okay. So after the class today, I'll try to make that a habit to post an after class quiz to make sure you understood everything that was discussed. Okay, so I will do that probably some point this evening and post it. Any other questions or concerns before we hang it up for the day?
Would the quiz be due at midnight tonight?
No. I'll give all the ones that I post after class, I give you a week to do it. Yeah, so there was one last week on the Plato reading. So if you haven't done that yet, make sure you do that one as well. Okay. Other questions? All right, so hopefully you found that to be a thoughtful and engaging class. I was mostly me talking, but some of you guys pitched in, so I appreciate you. But we'll see you next time.
Have a good day.
See you, Mandy.
Yeah, no, he doesn't